Hi, I'm Nina Linder, and today I'm going to be going over my Module 3 discussion for the U.S. History 10 ADLA class. So I just wanted to go over the basic concepts that we learned in this module and everything that you need to know moving forward and taking what you can from this lesson. So I have a couple different visual aids. First, I wanted to get into the Battle of Saratoga. So using these visual aids, which I will go ahead and attach the Google Slides for you so you can see these visual aids better. But just going off that, the Battle of Saratoga was a very momentous battle in the American Revolution. It was the turning point in the war. This overall boosted and lifted morale for the American patriots. This was just the turning point of the war, and it just allowed them to have some confidence in themselves and go ahead and continue with their future battles, knowing that they had potential prospects for their rights and their government that they were trying to ensue. So this battle also helped to secure foreign aid from our allies, and this just brought a lot of gratitude to our American patriots. So as you can see on the slides, I have a couple different statistics about the casualties that incurred. Like I said, I'll go ahead and link that so you can see that closer up. I was going to make a poster, but that also didn't show up on the video. So I will go ahead and link that so that it's easier for you to see. But overall, there were 330 Americans killed and then almost 1,100 British killed, which is a vast difference, especially since Great Britain had the bigger army and they were much more substantial, they had more money, and the American colonists, the Minutemen, did not know how to fight. So now moving on to the battle at Yorktown, this was when the British surrendered in the American Revolution. So this happened on October 19th, 1781. I also have some more visual aids here for you. This was the last major battle in the war. Yorktown was the last official battle, and this ended the entire American Revolution. So General Cornwallis from Britain felt that he was trapped behind a couple different troops. He tried to escape one night, but through the sea, but due to a storm, he was not able to leave. So he was stuck there, and he eventually had to turn to the point of surrendering to the American colonists. He was trapped and forced to surrender. He was surrounded by enemy fire and then blocked off from receiving any foreign aid or any foreign help. He, like I said, tried to escape in the nighttime, but was unsuccessful. So the next day he had to send out a British redcoat with a white flag to announce that they had surrendered. British, they lacked financial resources at this point, and then they just felt that the war needed to come to an end. Their motivation was a lot slimmer than the American colonists who were fighting for their government and their rights. Great Britain, however, was just fighting in the war because they had to, and because they wanted to keep the colonists underneath their belt. So they ultimately sought peace in the Treaty of Paris, which happened 2 years later. But this was the final battle in the American Revolution, and it was one of the most momentous battles, as Yorktown was where they surrendered. Valley Forge, however, this was a major setback for American colonists. They lacked many resources that they needed to go ahead and fight in continuing battles. They had lack of medicine, lack of food, they were starving, there were diseases, there were just a lot of defamations that happened at Valley Forge. So the Continental Army, or the Minutemen, they struggled a lot. They had low hopes here. Although there were no battles that took place at Valley Forge, George Washington led them into this area for the winter, where they set up camp for the winter. So the lack of organization, the food and money shortages, and then obviously all of the disease made it so that they were dying in high numbers and that their hopes were very low at this point. Valley Forge was also called the birthplace of the American Army. They came out rejuvenated by June of 1778, but that winter was very, very hard for their troops. This was the birthplace because their motivation was much stronger than Great Britain, for example. Valley Forge really tested their limits, and because of their lack of resources, it made them just fight for their rights just that much more. The Battle of Trenton in 1776, I chose to include this because I think that this was not necessarily a turning point in the war, but I think it was a great battle that we incurred, and that it really just brought up the hopes for American soldiers. So on the night of Christmas in 1776, George Washington came up with a plan, and he said that the Hessians, which were hired by Great Britain, they hired them to help out unlike our allies who just contributed without us needing to pay them. George Washington said that we were going to go ahead and cross the Delaware River, and we're going to attack the Hessians, and we're going to launch a battle that they didn't know about and just sneak up on them. So they surprised a garrison of 1,500 Hessians. He led his men over the icy Delaware River and then on a 10-mile hike into Trenton, and he attacked and surprised the garrison of 1,500 Hessians. So this ended up being successful, and they dominated the fight. This was a great rejuvenation for the Continental Army, as they had actually successfully won after going through everything at Valley Forge and having all of the detrimental setbacks that they had. They went ahead and did this when the Hessians were least expecting, and it proved to them that they had a chance in this American Revolution. It totally revived the Continental Army, and they had much more confidence going forward. Washington, because of the Battle of Trenton, became famous, and he won the loyalty of a lot of his colonists. He was already somewhat famous at this point, but as a general manager soldier, he just really impacted the spirits, and he became famous because of this. As for the American colonists and the economy, the war affected them quite a bit. So after the entire war, there was a new open market system. So there were new trade relationships, and this opened the door for new markets that they hadn't seen before. It also opened the Western territories for expansion, as we see later in Module 4 with the Louisiana Purchase. But in the meantime, there were new prospects for expanding the areas of the colonies and moving past just the 13 colonies that we've seen. There were new manufacturers and new distribution that we didn't quite see before. We didn't need to go to Great Britain for all of our supplies and food and everything, so we as American merchants started selling our own things and trading our own things, and this led to a boost in the economy for every colonist, and there were more merchants and traders at this point. This was also the end of mercantilism. And then as for women and slaves, so women, like previously in the war, they had little to no political power whatsoever. They were seen as nobodies, and they had no difference in political matters whatsoever. However, following the American Revolution, they became Republican mothers and were in charge of educating others. This is a step forward, seeing as they are given a voice and a platform on a lower level. However, they are still not given all of the rights that we see in modern day today. But this was a step forward, seeing as they were able to go ahead and educate others on their constitutional rights and just their forthcomings. But they were pretty much still out on the issue. So more people went ahead and gained the right to vote. Seeing as that patriotism was such a big, prominent topic in our country at this time, more people were open to voting and more people wanted to vote. Our country was thriving, and everyone had this strong sense of nationalism that we somewhat still see today. Colonists during the war, however, the ones who weren't Minutemen fighting in the war, they tended to their job, and all of their extra resources or money or any supplies that they had would go and be contributed to the Continental Army. It was really great to see as a nation how we came together and how colonists put forth all of their spare change to help fight in the ways that they could, even if they couldn't physically fight. So one thing that I thought was super interesting were the signers of the Constitution, which I included all of the 39 delegates that signed the Constitution on this slide. This happened on September 17th, 1787. So the Constitution was a very controversial topic, and I'm gonna go ahead and get more into that. So the Constitution was very controversial. There were Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists supported the ratification. They said that the Constitution is as good as it is and should just be sent forward. We didn't need to add anything, we didn't need to change anything, and they wanted those strong rights. Anti-Federalists, however, thought that they either didn't agree with the Constitution, or they thought that there needed to be a Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. So there were about 55 delegates, however 39 signed the Constitution. I thought this was very interesting because a lot of these men were putting their reputations and just their livelihoods on the line by signing this Constitution. They set forth, after the First Continental Congress, and they set forth and said, I believe in our rights, I believe in our passion, and I'm gonna go ahead and sign this and stand up to anyone who disagrees with me. So I thought that was super interesting, and I would love to do some more research on that after this history class. As for the Bill of Rights, going back into that, these were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. The most famous one is the first one, which is our right of speech, whether that be pure speech, written speech, symbolic speech, our right to religion, our right to peacefully assemble. Our Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, and so forth. It continues through the 10, but the Bill of Rights were the first 10 that were added to the Constitution. Like I said, the Anti-Federalists believe that the Bill of Rights need to be added to the Constitution before it's ratified so that we can ensure, as Americans, that we're getting our full range of rights. And then the Constitution and the Bill of Rights went ahead and guaranteed the civil rights and civil liberties that we still see to this day. Obviously, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution are still in full swing effect today. We see it in the Supreme Court, we see it in many rulings, many political assemblies across the country. Finally, I have the Articles of Confederation that I want to get to. The Continental Congress ratified this in 1781. This established the functions of the national government after we declared independence from Great Britain. The Articles of Confederation were our first form of government, and many people thought that the Articles of Confederation were actually very poorly written, which in fact it was, and there were many cons to the Articles of Confederation. We can't blame them, however, as this was our first form of government and first first signing that we actually put forth as the United States. So this was ratified in 1781. Like I said, it allowed each state one vote, meaning that there was little to no central government. This meant that the federal government was essentially screwed over when it came to having the power to levy taxes or impose taxes, regulate any trade, whether that be internationally or just domestically, and then they couldn't establish a federal judiciary. So the lack of central government made it so that states had way too much power, and states that had too much taxing happening weren't getting taxed because the central government could not enforce that upon them. So that was my module discussion. I learned a lot of different things, and I hope you took these slides and learned a lot from my discussion as well. Like I said, I'll be going ahead and attaching those Google Slides for you. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.